Welcome to Untold History, the space where we explore the events that changed the world. Today we analyze one of the most celebrated dates on the planet, July 4th, American Independence Day. Fireworks, speeches, freedom, but freedom for whom? Was it really a revolution for equality or a rebellion by millionaires to protect their businesses? What role did slaves, indigenous people, women, and those who signed nothing but paid for everything play? In this special episode, we'll pull back the curtain on this epic tale to look at what lay behind it: ambitions, contradictions, exclusions, and also a seed that, over time, transformed into struggle. This is not the story you were told. This is Untold History, the other independence. Philadelphia, summer of 1776. The air is thick, heavy with humidity and tension. In a poorly ventilated room, a group of wealthy white men are about to sign a document that will change the world. Outside, the people barely know what is being decided. And inside, what is being written is not revolutionary poetry, but a carefully calculated political manifesto. It is the Declaration of Independence. But if you look closely, between the solemn words and the promises of freedom, there is a much more complex story. Because the independence of the United States was not the result of a spontaneous spark or a pure popular rebellion. It was, rather, a geopolitical, economic, and power play orchestrated by an elite with very specific interests. This is not the official history. This is the other independence. To understand it, we must stop looking at George Washington as the idealized father of the country and begin to see him for what he truly was: a millionaire landowner, owner of hundreds of slaves, with ties to finance and agricultural production, concerned not so much with the rights of man, but with the security of his businesses. Thomas Jefferson wrote about the inalienable rights of man while on his Monticello plantation. He enslaved more than 600 people. Enlightened men, yes, but also deeply committed to a social order that depended on forced labor, racism, and structural inequality. When they said no taxation without representation, they weren't speaking on behalf of poor farmers, slaves, or indigenous people. They were speaking on behalf of merchants, landowners, shipowners, and rum smugglers. What was at stake wasn't just parliamentary representation, but the ability to manage their own taxes, their own laws, and their trade without having to answer to the British Parliament. Ultimately, they wanted to continue doing business without interference from London. In that sense, independence was also a fiscal and customs insurrection. But it would be unfair to think it was all cold calculations. There were also ideas. The Enlightenment ran through the veins of these men. There was a conviction that power should have limits, that governments owed their legitimacy to the consent of the governed. Of course, that consent wasn't for everyone. It was for white people, for property owners, for the men who counted in censuses and in assemblies. Women, black people, indigenous people, were left out of that social contract. They were bodies that didn't matter, except when they could serve as labor, reproduction, or deterrence. The war for independence wasn't unanimous. About a third of the colonists remained loyal to the British Crown. Another third were neutral, simply trying to survive between the two sides. Only a portion was committed to the revolutionary cause. But even so, the subsequent narrative simplified everything: good patriots, bad British. The truth was murkier. There was plunder, betrayal, shifting loyalties. In the Carolinas, the war was brutal: feuding neighbors, massacres between militias, personal vendettas disguised as politics. And while whites decided their fate, indigenous peoples watched their world collapse. Many tried to reach an agreement with the British, who at least offered limits on colonial expansion. But after independence, those agreements became worthless. The new American government advanced on their lands with the legitimacy of victory. In the name of freedom, the forced displacements that would later be known as Manifest Destiny began. African Americans also found no freedom in independence. On the contrary, slavery expanded. The South needed it to sustain its economy, and the North tolerated it and even financed it out of convenience. In fact, one of the revolutionaries' greatest fears was that the British would use slaves as soldiers, offering them freedom in exchange for loyalty. And so it was. Thousands of enslaved people fled to British lines. Some managed to escape. Many others were returned, sold, or abandoned after the defeat. Even those who fought for independence and dreamed of a new republic were disappointed. At the end of the war, thousands of veterans were abandoned to their fate. Without pensions, without land, without recognition. The new nation had other priorities: stabilizing the economy, consolidating federal power, protecting the interests of large landowners. The Constitution was a political masterpiece, but profoundly conservative. It did not abolish slavery. It did not guarantee universal rights. It did not democratize power. On the contrary, it concentrated it in the hands of a few. And yet, within that limited framework, the seed was planted. The promise of equality, though hypocritical in its origin, became a mobilizing prospect. Women began to claim their place. Slaves began to rebel. Workers demanded rights. What the Founding Fathers did not imagine was that their rhetoric would later be used to challenge them. That the words they wrote, freedom, justice, representation, would not be their exclusive property, but tools for others to rise up, resist, and demand. The independence of the United States was not a popular revolution in the classic sense. It was an agreement between elites sustained on a profoundly unequal basis. But it was also the beginning of a permanent contradiction. A nation that proclaims itself free while enslaving, that speaks of equality while discriminating, that venerates the law while adapting it to its interests. And that tension is, perhaps, the most American of all. Today, the image of the 4th of July is filled with fireworks, flags, and patriotic speeches. But beneath that aesthetic, questions remain open. Who was included in that promise of freedom? Who was left out? And how independent can a country be if it is born on slavery, dispossession, and exclusion? Perhaps, rather than celebrating an official history, we need to hear the untold story. Because only when we face our contradictions head-on can we begin to understand what kind of freedom is truly worth defending. And so ends this special episode. If you've made it this far, you already know that history isn't just a list of dates and names, but a battlefield where it's decided who has a voice and who remains silent. American independence was many things: an opportunity, a contradiction, a half-fulfilled promise. It's not a story to be repeated by heart, but to be rethought with eyes wide open. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. This was Untold History. Until next time.